guys, today we're going to talk about royal pythons, and we're going to touch a little bit on about the care of royal pythons, what they need, how big they get roughly, males to females, different morphs and so on and so forth. Hope you enjoy. So this is a royal python, also known as a ball python. There he is. This one's my favourite morph. I just love this morph where they have a slight pattern and like a normal pattern, and then it goes into white. This one's a high white, but it's a pied. The morph is a pied or a piebald. Royal pythons are probably one of the most popular snake pets, or pet snakes shall I say. So they come in a variety of different colours. You can get pure white, you can get pure black, and everything in between pretty much. They've become very, very popular with people breeding, so there's new genetics being found all the time, different morphs being produced, world's first, stuff like that. They get roughly to between 4 and 5 foot, however they have been recorded around about 6 foot, and obviously smaller as well. Males typically are smaller than females, a female being a little bit larger because obviously that's the one that produces the eggs. The female hold the eggs. One of the biggest differences between pythons and boas is pythons lay eggs and boas give birth, they're live bearers. So there's multiple ways of keeping these. There's a lot of breeders that keep them in rack systems, so you can keep them in a rack system. It's very popular. Personally, I think they look much better in a vivarium, a wooden vivarium. It just looks nicer. I think you can give them a bit of enrichment in there, so decoration, hides, water ball, etc., and it looks a bit more natural. There's also lots of different ways to house these with the temperature and different equipment you can use. So obviously on the rack system, a lot of people use heat mats or heat cables on a thermostat, which warms up basically a tub at the back of the tub, which gives them a hot spot, and then at the front of the tub is the cool end. Whereas in vivariums, personally I like to use ceramic bulbs. So I have a ceramic bulb in mine, and I set the basking spot at around about 32 degrees, and then the cool end normally sits around about 25, 26, and that just gives it a bit of a gradient throughout. So it's got 32 degrees basking spot. It's going to be a little bit warmer at the top, and then it's going to go down to around about 25 on the cool end. Depending on what heat source you're using would depend on what thermostat you would use. So personally on ceramics I use a pulse thermostat. If you was to use, let's say, a basking bulb and you had a nighttime drop, you could use a dimming thermostat on a timer, so it would be essentially more natural. However, I personally, for how I've kept them, I prefer to use a ceramic and have it on a pulse stat and have it on a 24-hour heat source. It's very similar to what you would do in a rub or rack system. You'd have it on a heat mat, on an on-off stat, or a pulse stat, to be honest, on a heat mat, and you'd have it on a 24-hour heat. So obviously in a rack system, people don't normally have lights on them. In a vivarium, if you can use UV lights, and that will benefit the snake, or you could use LEDs. So I've got LEDs on some of mine. Personally, I would never use a UV bulb on a snake like an albino, for instance, because it can actually cause problems and you can get UV burns off that, and they are more light sensitive. Food wise, so they typically mice or rats. However, you might have heard of something called a multi, which is an African soft-furred mouse, and that is what they would typically eat in the wild. Obviously these are captive bred, so we tend to feed them mice or rats. Multis are quite expensive. Although they are great food for them, they are quite expensive. So if you want to give your snake the best, then feed multis. But the tricky bit is, normally when they've had multis, they won't take anything else. they are very, very picky as well. So I read an article many years ago, and basically what royals do in the wild is they go into a African soft-furred mouse burrow, and they basically pick off their prey, and they gorge themselves. So they gorge themselves on the multis, and then they fast naturally. So I mean, in captivity we feed them once a week generally, and what I think that is I think that natural instinct of gorging themselves comes into captivity, and they end up fasting. So if you're feeding week in, week out, sometimes they'll get to a certain point where they get to adulthood, or sub-adults, and they just stop eating. There's other reasons for this as well. So normally due to breeding season, the males are looking for females, and the females are ovulating. So it's quite a common question I get asked. My ball python stopped eating, what shall I do? The worst thing you can do is to try and overfeed it. It'll just freak it out even more. So generally with these, if they feel secure, they tend to eat, but certain times of year they will stop eating, so you've got to be aware of that. Also, if it is tricky to get them eating to start with, maybe try them in a smaller enclosure, somewhere a bit more secure. So once they feel secure, they tend to eat. There's different methods of trying to make them eat as well. So you can do something called braining. It's quite a good method that I use quite a lot, and it's where I put a pin through the head of the rodent. It releases a scent, and then all of a sudden the snake smells that scent, goes for the rodent. Also, personally for me, what I do is I use a hairdryer. So I defrost the rodent, and then I use a hairdryer on the head of the rodent. And what that does is it sends a smell around the room where the snake's kept, but also it gives a heat source onto the head of the rodent. And these little pits in the side of their mouth will sense that. So they tend to go for the head of the rodent. And if I'm feeding with tongs, they'll go for the head of the rodent, and then there's a code of the steel tongs, and then the one for my hand. So they don't go for my hand, they don't get mistaken for my hand. So let's just have a little recap. So better to start off small, in smaller terrariums or vivariums, or tubs. So as you start off with small, and then you get bigger into the the adult size enclosure. Basking spot of around about 32 degrees, cool end about 25. Feed them once a week. Loads of different colours, loads of different variations. And yeah, this might be the type of snake for you. If it is, do a little bit more research. This is just a basic care video, and hopefully you've enjoyed it. Thanks guys, bye for now, bye.